The agenda I will lay out this evening is not a Republican agenda or a Democrat agenda. It's the agenda of the American people. There is a new opportunity in American politics if only we have the courage together to seize it. Victory is not winning for our party. Victory is winning for our country. We must reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good. Together, we can break decades of political stalemate. We can bridge old divisions, heal old wounds, build new coalitions, forge new solutions, and unlock the extraordinary promise of America's future. The decision is ours to make.
Powerful words from President Trump, but will he follow through? Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Rafael P. Roman. Unifying and combative. The president was both Tuesday night as he delivered his State of the Union address to a divided Congress and country. With House Speaker Nancy Pelosi watching over his shoulder, President Trump appealed for bipartisanship on issues such as infrastructure and lowering drug prices. But he slammed, quote, ridiculous partisan investigations of his administration and dug in on the border wall, the issue that forced the recent government shutdown and could spark another one soon. President Trump also saved some of his sharpest criticism for New York lawmakers, claiming they cheered the passage of a new abortion law that would, quote, allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb moments before birth. Governor Cuomo later pushed back on Twitter, writing, quote, the lies that we heard tonight are nothing new. The only thing new is that it is the president pushing these falsehoods. There's certainly a lot to unpack, including the Democratic response. So let's get right to it and welcome our first two guests of the evening. Ellis Henican is a political analyst and the co-author of former Governor Chris Christie's new best-selling book, Let Me Finish. And Clark Judge is a former speechwriter for President Reagan. He now runs the White House Writers Group, a strategic communications firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Ralph.
Good to be with you.
So, Ellis, since you're here, let me just start with you. I'd like to get both of your response. What was the headline from last night's speech, or what should have been the headline?
Well, you gotta love the soaring poetry, the calls to unity and patriotism, those shout-outs to the brave Americans in the chamber there. I mean, all that stuff was great. But I have doubts about whether the president really believes it, and the evidence in the cause of those doubts is right in the speech, and it's what you referred to, the red meat rhetoric on abortion, the long comments about the border wall, and the last 2 years of this presidency. Even when he talks nice, pretty soon he'll be talking rough again.
All right. Clark?
Well, I thought it was a brilliant speech. He started with an audience that was hostile, half of it, ready to boo, certainly ready to sit on their hands. By the end of it, they were singing happy birthday to one of the guests, and they were, it was a festive atmosphere. It was a remarkable turnaround. The positions he put out were clear, but he was also at pains to argue, to offer this compromise, to offer a sense of he's ready to deal if the Democrats are ready to deal. But the real danger here for the Democrats is that they could be coming off as obstructionists. And if they do, they're going to have a bad year in 2 years. If they don't, they could be in for another round in the House. The seats that were won were balanced seats. They were seats that could go either way. And the people who won them those seats that were that turned over, the people who won them, are going to want to find a way, or should be wanting to find a way, to have a compromise and consensus.
So which way is it likely to tilt after this speech? Are some of these Democrats going to say, okay, I'll support some funding for the wall so we don't have to shut down the government again? Or is it going to be obstructionism? Clark?
We'll see. The administration has made it clear that in coming up with their compromise proposal, which was launched a couple of weeks ago in a speech that we all know about, that they had quiet meetings with Democrats not in the leadership. Now, to me, that's likely to be a lot of Democrats in either swing states or swing districts. We'll see whether those Democrats at some point feel they can break from their leadership, or if the leadership feels that they have to go along with that swing group.
Ellis?
Clark has more faith than I do in the president's ability to change his tone and to alter his strategy. We've seen in previous State of the Union addresses this kind of rhetoric from Donald Trump, and there is no evidence that he's ever meant it, because we know that by the fact that always by the next morning at the latest, he's back to this base strategy of just throwing harsh rhetoric at the 35% or so of Americans who are with him, and frankly, giving the cold shoulder to the rest of the country. One of the reasons that the administration has been far less effective at getting its own goals into practice than it has been.
But listen, there was a snap poll by CNN right after the speech. 76% of the viewers of the speech, not 43, not 46, 76% of the viewers said they approved of the speech. And in CBS, a CBS snap poll said that 72% of viewers approved of his immigration policy. Isn't that significant?
Well, what it tells us is who watched the speech. And when you dig down on those numbers, as I was doing this morning, you see that there was a large tilt older and large tilt Republicans. A lot of Dems, frankly, just didn't watch last night. And so yeah, it played well with the audience. The Republicans in the chamber all were high-fiving and congratulating the president. But listen, I just don't think these things change that many minds. We're a very tribal country at this point, and I am very skeptical that one speech, even a lovely speech, is going to have a huge impact on how people feel about this president.
Well, let me ask you about we kind of touched on it already, but the reaction of the Democrats sitting in the chamber to this speech. As you said, it's very tough. You have to balance when you applaud and when you don't applaud, especially when the guests in the gallery. I mean, it's impossible not to applaud to those people. It's a tough thing to do. But the women in white, the congresswomen, the Democratic congresswomen dressed in white, in homage to women's suffrage, they were sitting on their hands most of the speech. At one point, they stood up and clapped. Some commentators said that they were giving the president a standing ovation when he talked about women employment and when he talked about the largest number of women in Congress. Were they really giving him a standing ovation there, Ellis?
Well, as Clark knows, it's dicey to be in the opposition party at the State of the Union. The wearing white thing, I think, was great. It was a silent statement that actually meant something. Screaming out, "You lie," from the chamber really doesn't come off very well. Well, and no, they were clapping for themselves. I mean, many of them ran in opposition to Donald Trump, but I think they threaded the needle fairly well there.
Clark?
I think that they are in great danger of becoming the obstructionist party. The women, yes, any number of commentators have noted already that they were most enthusiastic about clapping for themselves, but that broke ice. The singing of Happy Birthday came later. They were more applauding after that. I think this was a masterful example of how you take a very, very parts of it hostile audience and turn them around. Now, we just heard that that his rhetoric is sometimes harsh. Well, the rhetoric on both sides is sometimes harsh these days. And he responds to it, and then they respond to it. He put out an offer last night, in essence, to put down the swords, put down the guns, start to talk to one another. We'll see whether Mrs. Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, and her caucus wants to take him up on that.
Now, I'd like to know what both of you thought was the best moment of the speech and the worst moment. But you already made reference to his reference to the investigation of him, which, according to commentators, seemed to have been what some people think was his worst moment. We have a clip of that. Let's take a look.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. It just doesn't work that way.
Ellis, do you think it was a smart move to remind the audiences that he's under investigation?
Well, it's kind of hard to avoid, right? I don't know if it was the best moment or the worst moment, but I would say it was the most memorable moment to stand in front of the chamber there and say, you know what, we can only proceed as a nation if you don't investigate me. Whatever you do, don't look under any of these rocks here, folks. It was very Trumpian. It's revealing, so I'm not objecting to it. I just thought it was interesting.
Clark, what do you think of that? Should he have said it?
Sure. How could you miss it? How could you avoid it?
Yeah.
And he's made it clear he's disgusted by it. It's not that he's trying to avoid something or another. He sees it as harassment rather than as a threat. Well, okay, fair enough. And this is what he's offering now is let's get some of this other stuff behind us. Let's put it to an end. It may well be coming to an end. Let's get on with key business. That is an appropriate, it's actually has the added advantage of, as Henry Kissinger once said, truth.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes, but I do want to get quickly what you thought. Clark, let me start with you. What was the best moment of the speech? What was the worst moment as far as you're concerned?
Well, I felt that the speech overall was fantastic. I wouldn't pick out a worst moment. I thought it was a fantastic speech under very difficult circumstances, as has been the case whenever he's gone before a joint session of Congress, and each time he's knocked it out of the park. The best moment, maybe when everybody joined in singing "Happy Birthday" to the Holocaust survivor. That was a great moment.
Ellis?
You know, I'm a sucker for singling out those brave Americans in the audience. As Clark knows, Ronald Reagan was truly the master of that.
Well, he started it.
I don't know if he invented it, but he certainly perfected it. Oh, fair enough. I bow to you on that one, Clark. But to me, that's the emotional thing, and it puts the opposition party in a question of, do you stand and applaud for the victim or the brave service member? Do you not? So that was clearly the most effective moment of the speech. I'm just not convinced how much he means it, because even in the speech, guys, he kept inserting those little digs and all. I mean, the thing he talked about the most was the border wall, and the thing he didn't mention at all was the government shutdown we just been in. I mean, that's selective editing to me.
All right, so we have less than a minute, and I have to get to this. Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor in Georgia and lost, she gave the Democratic response. It's kind of like a losing proposition to give the response because they don't have the pomp and circumstances of the president. How'd she do?
An impossible assignment. She did better than almost anybody. And just ask Marco Rubio or Bobby Jindal, my home state governor, if you think that's an easy gig.
Clark?
There have been some successful ones. Bob Dole responding to Bill Clinton when he launched health care, Hillary Care, effectively was ruled as having upstaged the president. So there have been some successful ones. This one, I felt it was after the president's speech, which was very forthcoming, very much offering olive branches. It was the wrong speech at the wrong time. How would she know? But it was the wrong speech. At the same time, she is clearly a very attractive political person. That it was beautifully delivered. She has a warm and way about her, and crisp and knowledgeable. So I'd say it came off well for her, but the words came off poorly.
All right. Well, Clark, Ellis, thank you so much for joining us
Good
today.
seeing you guys.